He had silenced judges, frightened senators, and made grown men forget their own names. But the night Maya Bennett whispered his dead mother's final words, Daniel Hahn froze with his hand still raised in the air. The private dining room at Soul Ivory had gone so quiet that even the ice in the water glasses seemed afraid to crack. Outside the tall windows, Los Angeles glittered 12 floors below, all headlights and rooftop pools and expensive lies. But inside that room, beneath the amber glow of paper lanterns and the polished shine of black walnut walls, everyone was watching the most feared Korean Mafia boss on the West Coast stop breathing for one impossible second. Maya had not meant to speak. She had been told not to speak. Victor Sloan, the floor manager, had pulled her aside before the dinner service began and reminded her twice that the men in the orchid room were not regular customers. No small talk. No questions. No eye contact unless they ask for something. Pour the tea, clear the plates, disappear. That was what Maya Bennett had spent most of her life learning how to do anyway. Disappear behind a tray. Disappear behind a uniform. Disappear behind the kind of smile people expected from a black waitress in a restaurant where one bottle of imported whiskey cost more than her monthly rent in Inglewood. She moved through the room with careful hands, balancing a porcelain teapot painted with blue cranes, her black shoes whispering across the thick carpet. Around the long table sat men in tailored suits, their voices low, their watches heavy, their faces blank in the practiced way of people who had learned that emotion was a weakness. At the head of the table sat Daniel Hahn. He was 36, broad-shouldered, perfectly still, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie and a white shirt buttoned to the throat. His skin was pale under the warm light, his black hair combed back with severe precision, his face sharp enough to look carved rather than born. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When Daniel Hahn spoke, the room leaned toward him. When he looked at someone, that person remembered every mistake they had ever made. And tonight all that cold attention was fixed on a man seated at the far end of the table, a nervous accountant named Peter Vale who kept twisting a linen napkin in his lap. No one had touched the food. The grilled short ribs had gone cold. The silver chopsticks lay untouched beside porcelain bowls of rice. Maya felt the pressure of the room pressing against her ribs as she poured tea, one cup after another, keeping her eyes low the way Victor had taught her. But even with her eyes down, she could feel Daniel's command gathering like thunder. Peter Vale was pleading quietly, saying it had been a misunderstanding, saying numbers could be corrected, saying he had a family. Daniel listened without blinking. Then he lifted one hand, 2 fingers barely rising from the table, a small motion that made every man in the room straighten. Maya's breath caught. She did not know what the gesture meant, but she understood enough to know that something irreversible was about to happen. Her hand trembled. The teapot tipped too fast. Hot tea splashed onto the saucer beside Daniel's cup, and the tiny sound it made was louder than it should have been. Victor's face tightened near the door. Maya felt heat rush into her cheeks. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. Daniel did not look at the spill. He looked at her. For the first time that night, those dark, unreadable eyes settled fully on Maya Bennett, and for one heartbeat she forgot the room, forgot the men, forgot Victor's warning. Because Daniel had reached forward to move his cup, and the sleeve of his jacket shifted just enough to reveal the ring on his right hand. Pale green jade, oval-shaped, set in old gold. Maya's body went cold. 7 years disappeared. She saw a narrow hospital room on the east side, fluorescent lights humming overhead, rain tapping against a cracked window, and an elderly Korean woman with trembling fingers describing that same ring as if it were the last beautiful thing left in the world. "My son wears it," she had whispered. "He thinks it makes him strong, but it was never meant for power. It was meant to remind him of home." Maya had been 21 then, volunteering night shifts at St. Bridget's Charity Hospice because grief had made her restless and because the forgotten people there needed someone willing to sit beside them when the rest of the world had gone home. The woman's name had been Eun-ji Han. She had spoken English softly, with pauses between words, sometimes slipping into Korean when the pain grew heavy. For 3 nights Maya held her hand, changed the damp cloth on her forehead, listened to stories about a little boy who used to hide behind her skirt during thunderstorms. A boy named Daniel. A boy who, according to his mother, had once cried when he saw a bird with a broken wing. That memory collided violently with the man sitting before her now, the man whose raised hand could make an entire room stop moving. Maya should have stayed silent. Poor women survived by knowing when truth was too expensive. But Daniel's fingers were still raised. Peter Vale was still shaking at the end of the table, and Eunji Han's final voice rose from the deepest place in Maya's memory, fragile and urgent and impossible to ignore. Maya leaned closer before fear could pull her back. Her Korean was imperfect, shaped by memory instead of fluency, but the words left her mouth in a trembling whisper. Iyama said, "Don't let grief make a grave out of your heart." Daniel's hand stopped in midair. The men around the table seemed to turn to stone. Victor took one step forward then froze. Daniel's face did not soften. It emptied. Every trace of command, calculation, and cold authority vanished so completely that for one breath he looked not like a boss, not like a legend, not like the man Los Angeles feared after midnight, but like a son standing outside a hospital room too late to say goodbye. His eyes locked on Maya's face. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, and it carried more danger than shouting ever could. "Who taught you those words?" Maya's throat tightened. The porcelain teapot felt suddenly too heavy in her hands. She could feel every stare in the room cutting into her uniform, her skin, her courage. But she did not look away. "Your mother did," she said softly, and the room went silent. Victor Sloan moved first because men like him always rush toward cruelty when they thought power was watching. "That is enough," he snapped, crossing the carpet with his polished shoes flashing under the lantern light. His voice was sharp, but his face had gone pale. "Maya, step away from the table. Now." Maya did not move. The teapot still rested in both hands, her fingers tight around the warm handle, but her eyes stayed on Daniel Han. He had not blinked since she spoke. Around him, the men at the table waited for some sign, some command, some return of the cold authority they understood. None came. Daniel only stared at the waitress standing beside him as if she had carried a ghost into the room and placed it gently between the teacups. Victor reached for Maya's elbow, not roughly, but with the familiar ownership of a manager who believed a uniform made a person smaller. Before his fingers touched her sleeve, Daniel's voice cut through the room. "Do not touch her." For words. Quiet. Controlled. Absolute. Victor stopped so quickly his hand hung awkwardly in the air.
Mr. Han, I apologis.
She is temporary staff. She does not understand who she is speaking to. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept silent. She had learned a long time ago that defending your dignity in front of the wrong audience could cost you rent money, references, and sometimes the small peace you had built with both hands. Victor turned toward the table, desperate to clean the moment before it stained him. She must have heard something online. People search famous families. They memorize phrases. She is just trying to get attention. The word just landed harder than an insult. Just a waitress. Just temporary staff. Just a black woman in a black apron carrying tea for men whose shoes cost more than her car. Maya felt the room measuring her by every visible thing. The simple bun pinned at the back of her head, the small silver cross at her throat, the faint crease in her sleeves from washing her uniform in the sink the night before because the laundromat had closed early. Daniel finally lowered his hand. Not to give the old command, not to dismiss her, but to rest his palm beside the jade ring. His thumb moved once over the stone slowly, as if confirming it was real. "Your full name," he said. Maya swallowed. "Maya Bennett. How do you know my mother?" The question did not sound like disbelief. It sounded like a door he had spent 7 years nailing shut had opened by itself. Ji-won Park, Daniel's closest advisor, leaned forward from the right side of the table. He was older, silver-threaded through his black hair, his suit neat enough to look almost surgical. "Daniel, this is a manipulation. We should clear the room and verify who she is." Daniel did not look at him. "I asked her." Maya drew in a careful breath. The orchid room seemed to tilt around her. "I met her at St. Bridget's Charity Hospice east of downtown. 7 years ago. I was volunteering there 3 nights a week." A murmur moved through the table, low and uneasy. Victor gave a short laugh that died almost immediately. "That is impossible. She is a server, not a nurse." Maya turned her head then just enough to look at him. Her voice stayed soft, but something in it stopped his smile. "You do not have to be a nurse to sit with someone who is dying." The words settled over the room with a weight no one could push away. Daniel's eyes sharpened, but not with anger, with pain trying not to show its face. Maya continued, each sentence pulled carefully from a place she had not opened in years. She was in room 412. The window latch was broken, so the rain made a tapping sound all night. She hated the green gelatin cups, but she liked crushed ice. She kept asking if the hallway clock was right because she thought her son might still come. Daniel's face changed at the word son. Only a fraction, only enough for someone watching closely to see the wound beneath the stone. Maya saw it. She wished she had not, because it made him human, and human pain was always harder to survive than power. Ji-won's expression tightened. Many people could know a hospital room number. Maya looked back at Daniel. She called you her little thunderstorm, she said. Because when you were a child, you were loud when you were scared but quiet when you were hurt. The silence that followed was different from the first. The first silence had been shock. This one was recognition. Daniel leaned back as if the air had left his chest. For the first time since Maya had entered the room, he looked away from her and down at the untouched cup of tea. His voice came out lower than before. Everyone leave. No one moved. Daniel lifted his eyes. Except Maya Bennett. The room emptied with the careful speed of people who understood that silence could be in order. Chairs slid back without scraping. Men collected their phones, their folders, their fear, and walked toward the door with their eyes lowered. Peter Vale looked as if he had been granted air after drowning, but even he did not dare speak. Victor lingered near the threshold, his mouth opening as though he might explain, apologize, or blame someone else, but Daniel turned his head just slightly and Victor disappeared into the hallway. Ji-won Park was the last to leave. He paused beside Daniel's chair, his expression measured, almost fatherly. You should not be alone with someone we have not cleared, he said. Daniel did not answer immediately. He kept his gaze on the jade ring, the green stone catching the warm light like something pulled from deep water. Then stand outside the door, Daniel said. Ji-won's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head and stepped out. The door closed with a soft click that sounded final. Maya stood alone in the orchid room, still wearing her apron, still holding the teapot as if someone might ask for more tea and return the world to normal. Nothing about the world felt normal now. The man sitting at the head of the table was supposed to be untouchable, yet the air around him seemed thin and breakable. Daniel motioned toward the chair nearest him. Sit down. Maya looked at the chair, then at the expensive carpet beneath her shoes. I should not. Why? Because people who serve in rooms like this do not sit in them. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers. For a second, something like shame passed behind them, brief but unmistakable. Tonight they do. Maya set the teapot down carefully and sat on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap. The chair was deep and upholstered in cream leather, so soft it made her feel more aware of the $10 insoles in her work shoes and the ache in her knees from a double shift. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him noticed everything, but this time his attention did not feel like inspection. It felt like he was trying to understand the distance between her life and his. Tell me about the hospice, he said. Maya breathed in slowly. The scent of roasted sesame, cold beef and expensive cologne hung in the room, but beneath it her memory brought back antiseptic, stale coffee, and rainwater leaking through an old window frame. St. Bridget's was not a place people chose, she began. It was where they went when insurance ran out, or families stopped answering calls, or there was nowhere else quiet enough to die. Daniel's face did not move, but his fingers curled once against the table. My mother was there? Yes. The word was gentle, but it still landed hard. Maya watched him absorb it. His mother, hidden from his world not in some private medical suite with flowers and specialists, but in a charity hospice where the blankets were thin and the night nurse covered 2 floors alone. She never complained, Maya said. Not once. She thanked everyone. Even when the pain was bad, she thanked people for bringing water. She would fold her napkin after every meal even if she had only taken 2 bites. She said dignity was something you practiced when nobody important was watching. Daniel closed his eyes. The room seemed to lean with him into the past. That sounds like her. Maya's voice softened. She talked about you more than anything else. Not about business. Not about money. You. She said you used to line up toy cars by color. She said you hated carrots unless she cut them into stars. She said when you were 8, you gave your winter coat to a boy at school and came home pretending you had lost it. Daniel opened his eyes, and for the first time there was no ice in them at all. Only grief, old and stunned and awake. I did lose it, he said, but the lie had no strength left. Maya almost smiled, though her eyes burned. She knew. The smallest breath escaped him, not laughter, not crying, something caught between the two. For 7 years, Daniel Han had been told his mother's final days were peaceful, private, handled with respect. He had accepted the lie because the truth would have demanded a pain he did not know how to carry. Now the truth sat across from him in a waitress uniform, speaking with steady hands and tired eyes. Why did she speak to you? He asked. Because I was there, Maya said. Sometimes that is all love needs. Someone who stays. Daniel looked toward the closed door, toward the world of advisors and guards and polished loyalty waiting outside. Then he looked back at Maya. Was she alone at the end? Maya held his gaze, refusing to let the answer become another wound without mercy. No, she said. I was holding her hand. Daniel did not speak for a long time. The words seemed to sit between them like a candle burning down to the truth. I was holding her hand. Maya had said it gently, but gentleness did not make it lighter. It reached into Daniel Han and touched the boy he had buried under 7 years of tailored suits, locked doors, and men who called fear respect. He looked down at the jade ring again. His mother had worn it before him. He remembered being small enough to fit under the kitchen table while she cooked, remembered her laughing as she slid the ring off and let him hold it up to the sunlight. Do not wear this when you become powerful, she had told him. Wear it when you forget how to be kind. Back then he had not understood. Now the memory came back so clearly that it almost hurt to breathe. She gave you something, he said. It was not a question, but Maya's eyes changed. Not fear exactly. More like the look of someone who had carried a promise too long, and was afraid of what would happen when she finally set it down. Yes, she said. Daniel's hand tightened around the edge of the table. Why did you not bring it to me? Maya looked toward the closed door, then back at him. Because I did not know how to reach you. My name was not hidden. No, Maya said softly. But men like you are. That stopped him. Outside the orchid room, someone shifted in the hallway, but neither of them looked away from each other. Maya continued, her voice steady, not defensive, not pleading. I was 21. I had student debt, no car for 6 months, and a phone that shut off every other Friday. I knew your name, but I did not know your world. I went to the address she gave me once. Daniel's expression sharpened. What address? A house in Hancock Park. White gate. 2 stone lions by the driveway. Daniel knew it immediately. His childhood home. His mother's garden. A place he had not entered since the funeral because every hallway still knew her voice. What happened? He asked. Maya's mouth pressed into a thin line. A man at the gate told me I had the wrong house. I said I had something from Unji Han. He looked at my uniform from the diner where I worked back then, looked at my skin, and told me people like me should not make up stories about families like yours. The room changed temperature. Daniel did not move, but something cold returned to his face. This time it was not aimed at Maya. Who was the man? I do not know. Gray suit, silver hair, calm voice. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the door. Juwon. The name did not leave his mouth, but Maya saw it land in him. She had seen that kind of realization before in hospice rooms, when families understood too late that the truth had been sitting beside them all along. After that, Maya said, I kept the envelope because I promised her I would not throw it away. I carried it from apartment to apartment. In a shoebox at first, then in my coat pocket. When I got this job at Soul Ivory, I still had it with me. I do not know why. Maybe because promises get heavy when you stop carrying them. Daniel stood suddenly, but not with anger. He moved to the window, placing distance between himself and the table as if he needed the city to hold some of the weight. Below, Los Angeles stretched in gold and red, freeways glowing like veins, cars moving through the night unaware that an old wound had opened 12 floors above them. Do you have it here? He asked without turning around. Maya hesitated. Then she reached beneath her apron, into the inner pocket of her black work jacket hanging on the back of her chair. Her fingers found the folded envelope, softened at the corners from years of being moved, hidden, protected. The paper had yellowed slightly. On the front, in careful handwriting, was one name: Daniel. Maya held it out. He turned back slowly. For all his power, for all the men waiting outside, for all the money, buildings, favors, and fear attached to his name, Daniel Han looked almost afraid to cross the few feet between them. When he finally took the envelope, his thumb brushed the handwriting, and his face broke in a way no one in the orchid room would have believed possible. He did not open it right away. He only stared at his mother's letters, breathing through the shock of being loved from beyond a silence he thought had been empty. Maya lowered her hands to her lap. She said you would know when to read it. Daniel's voice came out rough. And when is that? Maya looked at the door, where hidden loyalties waited in expensive suits. Then she looked back at him. When the people around you fear losing control more than they fear losing your soul. Daniel opened the envelope with the care of a man touching something sacred. The room held its breath around him, although only Maya was there to hear it. The paper inside was thin, folded twice, and still carried the faintest trace of lavender, or maybe Daniel only imagined it because his mother had always kept dried lavender in the linen closet of the house with the white gate. His hands did not shake, but they slowed, and for Daniel Han that was the same as trembling. The first page was a letter, written in Korean with the neat, graceful strokes he remembered from birthday cards and lunchbox notes. My beloved son, it began, and Daniel had to close his eyes before the rest of the words could reach him. Maya looked away, giving him the small privacy that powerful people rarely offered and wounded people always needed. Daniel read in silence. His mother did not write about money. She did not write about revenge, reputation, or the family name men had spent generations polishing until it reflected nothing human. She wrote about a little boy who used to bring stray cats to the back porch. She wrote about the day he held an umbrella over her while rain soaked his own shoulders. She wrote that grief was not proof of love if it made him cruel. Then his eyes reached a sentence that made the air leave his chest. If Ji-won tells you I wanted distance, do not believe him. Daniel went completely still. Maya felt the change before she understood it. It moved through him like a door locking somewhere deep inside. Slowly, he unfolded the second page. It was not a letter. It was a photograph creased across one corner. Eun-ji Han stood in the garden of the Hancock Park house, thinner than Maya remembered but still elegant, one hand resting on a wooden cane. Beside her stood Ji-won Park, his silver hair darker than, his smile careful, one hand lightly gripping an envelope Daniel now recognized as the one he held. On the back of the photograph, his mother had written 6 words. He decided what you could know. Daniel stared at the image so long that Maya could hear the soft hum of the private room refrigerator behind the bar. Outside the door, the hallway remained quiet, too quiet. Ji-won was standing there. Maybe listening. Maybe waiting. Maybe realizing that 7 years of silence had finally found a voice in the one person nobody at Seoul Ivory thought mattered. Daniel placed the photograph on the table, then the letter beside it. His face had gone calm again, but it was not the old calm. The old calm was ice. This was something deeper, colder, and painfully clear. He told me she refused to see me, Daniel said. His voice was low, almost conversational, which made the words even heavier. He said she did not want my world near her hospital bed. He said she asked that I stay away until she was gone. Maya's eyes softened. She waited for you every night. The sentence did not break loudly. It broke quietly the way old glass cracks under pressure. Daniel looked at her. Every night. Every night, Maya said. She would ask if there had been a call. She would ask if anyone came by the front desk. The nurses stopped answering after a while because they thought it made her worse. So I answered. I told her maybe tomorrow. Daniel turned his face toward the window, but not before Maya saw the grief pass through him, raw and unguarded. For years he had hated himself for arriving late. Now he had to understand that someone had built the roadblock and called it loyalty. Did she know? He asked. That someone was keeping me away? Maya remembered Eun-ji's fingers closing around hers, weak but determined. She remembered the woman's eyes, tired and bright, full of a sorrow too intelligent to be fooled. Yes, Maya said. But she did not want your last memory of her to be anger. She wanted you to have a choice. Daniel almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. Everyone around me has spent years making choices for me. Then maybe that is why she trusted a stranger, Maya said. A stranger had nothing to gain by telling you the truth. Before Daniel could answer, the door opened without a knock. Ji-won Park stepped inside, his face composed, his posture respectful, but his eyes went immediately to the photograph on the table. For 1 second all the polish slipped. It was small, almost invisible, but Daniel saw it. Maya saw it too. Ji-won looked at the letter, then at Daniel, then at Maya, and the room seemed to shrink around the three of them. Daniel, Ji-won said carefully. Whatever she has told you, you need to remember who has stood beside you all these years. Daniel touched the jade ring once, then set his hand flat on the table beside his mother's final letter. That is exactly what I am remembering, he said. And the silence that followed made even Ji-won Park look away. Ji-won Park had spent most of his life mastering the art of standing close enough to power to guide it, but far enough away to deny his fingerprints. In every family photograph, every boardroom dinner, every crisis that Daniel had survived, Ji-won had been there with a calm voice and a clean handkerchief, offering advice that sounded like protection and felt like wisdom. For 7 years Daniel had called that loyalty. Now his mother's handwriting sat on the table like a witness, and the old man across from him looked smaller beneath the lantern light. You should have told me she wanted to see me, Daniel said. Ji-won's expression tightened, but he did not panic. Men like him did not panic in public. They rearranged the truth and called it strategy. Your mother was ill, fragile. The family was unstable. You were 29, surrounded by enemies, and one emotional decision could have cost everything. Daniel's eyes did not move. She was my mother. And you were the heir, Ji-won replied, his voice sharpening just enough to reveal the steel beneath the silk. Your grief would have been used against you. I made the decision your father would have made. The words crossed the table and struck something old in Daniel, but he did not flinch. Maya sat very still, aware that she had become the quiet center of a storm built long before she entered the room. She watched Ji-won speak to Daniel as if love were an inconvenience, as if a dying woman's hand reaching for her son had been nothing more than a scheduling problem in an empire. The sadness in Daniel's face changed then. It did not disappear. It hardened into clarity. My father is not here, he said. My mother is not here. So do not hide behind the dead while explaining what you did to them. Ji-won's nostrils flared. For the first time the careful mask slipped wider. I kept you alive. No, Daniel said. You kept me useful. The sentence fell softly, but it landed with the force of a door closing forever. Ji-won looked toward Maya, and there was accusation in his eyes now, not because she had lied, but because she had remembered. You have no idea what kind of world you stepped into, he said to her. You carried an envelope and a few sentimental words, and now you think you understand the weight of a family like this. Maya's hands tightened in her lap, but her voice stayed even. I understand a woman asking for her son. Ji-won gave a humorless breath. This is not a church basement, Miss Bennett. This is not charity work. Men like Daniel carry burdens you cannot imagine. Daniel stood then. Not fast. Not dramatically. He simply rose from the chair, and the room rose with him. Say her name properly. Ji-won blinked. What? Her name is Maya Bennett. Daniel's voice remained quiet, but something in it made even the walls seem to listen. Not the waitress. Not the girl. Not a problem. To manage. Maya Bennett. For the first time that night, Maya felt the weight of her own name in the mouth of someone powerful, not as an inconvenience, but as a fact no one was allowed to erase. Ji-won's face colored faintly. You are letting guilt speak for you. Daniel looked down at the letter again. For 7 years I let you speak for me. That ended tonight. Outside someone knocked once on the door, uncertain. Daniel did not answer. He removed the jade ring from his finger, the same ring his mother had once placed in his palm when he was a boy, and set it gently beside her letter. The small sound of gold touching wood carried through the room like a verdict. You told me she chose silence, Daniel said. But she chose a stranger with a kind heart because the men around her son had forgotten what kindness was. Ji-won's composure cracked. His mouth opened, but no explanation came quickly enough. Daniel turned toward the door. "Bring everyone back in." Maya looked at him startled. "Mr. Han," she said softly, "you do not have to make this public because of me." Daniel paused, and when he looked back, his face was wounded but steady. "This is not because of you," he said. "This is because of what was done in rooms where no one thought people like you would ever be believed." The door opened. Men returned one by one, cautious, confused, sensing that the shape of power had changed while they were gone. Victor hovered near the back, pale and sweating. Ji-won stood beside the table, suddenly exposed under the warm lights he had trusted all evening. Daniel picked up his mother's letter, held it where everyone could see it, and spoke without raising his voice. "For 7 years I was told my mother died without asking for me. Tonight Maya Bennett brought me the truth." No one moved. No one breathed loudly. Daniel turned his eyes to Ji-won. "And tonight, the man who buried that truth will answer for it without excuses." The room went silent. No one in the Orchid Room had ever seen Ji-won Park corrected in public. He had been the quiet architecture behind Daniel Han's empire. The man who whispered before decisions were made. The man whose approval opened doors. And whose disapproval closed careers. Yet now he stood beneath the golden lanterns with a dead woman's letter on the table, and the truth breathing through the room. Daniel did not shout. That was what made it worse. Anger could be dismissed as grief, but calm demanded attention. "You told me my mother asked for distance," Daniel said. "You told me she wanted peace without me there. You told me I would dishonor her final days by bringing my world to her bedside." Ji-won held his posture, but his eyes moved once toward the other men, measuring how much loyalty remained. "I made a judgment call." "No," Daniel said. "You made a cage and called it judgment." The words settled over the table. Maya sat near Daniel's chair, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles ached. She wanted to disappear again, to slip back into the hallway, to become only a server with a tray and an apron, but something held her there. Maybe it was Eunji's letter. Maybe it was the memory of that small hospital room where a dying mother had trusted her with a son she could no longer reach. Or maybe it was the strange, frightening knowledge that this room full of powerful men was finally listening to someone they had never been taught to see. Daniel turned to the older capo seated near the far end, a man with tired eyes who had wept when Maya mentioned the old lullaby. "Mr. Cho, you knew my mother's handwriting." The older man lowered his head. "Yes. You knew her song." "Yes. Then you know this letter is real." Mr. Cho looked at Ji-won, then at Daniel. Years of obedience trembled in that glance. Then he said, "It is real." The room shifted. Not loudly. Just enough. A current moving under still water. Ji-won felt it. His face remained controlled, but his influence began to loosen from the walls like old paint. Victor Sloan stood frozen near the back, realizing too late that the woman he had humiliated was no longer standing alone. Daniel placed the letter beside the photograph and slid both toward the center of the table. "From this moment forward, Ji-won Park speaks for no part of my family, my businesses, or my mother's memory." Ji-won's face hardened. "You would undo decades because of one emotional night." Daniel looked at him with a sadness sharper than rage. "You undid them when you decided my mother's final wish was less important than your control." He turned to 2 senior men near the door. "Escort Mr. Park to the conference suite downstairs. He will wait there with counsel. Every document he has signed in my name will be reviewed. Every decision connected to my mother's care will be opened." Ji-won's mouth tightened. "Daniel." For a moment the old name sounded almost tender, almost like family. Daniel's eyes did not soften. "You do not get to use my name like you protected it." No one touched Ji-won. No one needed to. The 2 men simply stepped aside, creating a path. That was Daniel's justice. Not spectacle. Not noise. The removal of trust in front of the people who had mistaken silence for innocence. Ji-won looked around the room one last time, searching for someone willing to object. No one did. When he walked out, the door closed softly behind him, and somehow that softness made it feel final. Maya exhaled before she realized she had been holding her breath. Daniel turned then, and his gaze found Victor. The manager flinched as if his own conscience had called his name. Mr. Sloan, Daniel said. Victor swallowed. Yes, Mr. Han. Earlier tonight, you said Maya Bennett was temporary staff. Victor's lips parted. I meant no disrespect. You meant all of it, Daniel said. The room went still again. You looked at her uniform and decided her dignity was optional. You heard her speak my mother's truth and called it attention. You saw a black woman carrying tea and believed that made her easy to dismiss. Victor's face burned red. I apologize if it came across that way. Daniel's voice lowered. Do not apologize for how it came across. Apologize for what it was. Victor turned slowly toward Maya. For the first time since she had worked at Soul Ivory, he looked at her without the protection of his title. Maya, he said, voice thin, I am sorry. I disrespected you. I dismissed you. I was wrong. Maya held his gaze. She did not smile to make him comfortable. She did not lower her eyes to make the room feel less ashamed. I hear you, she said. That was all. Daniel nodded once. You are relieved of your position until ownership reviews your conduct. Victor looked as if the carpet had vanished beneath him, but he said nothing. As he left, Maya felt the room change once more. The men who had ignored her an hour earlier now knew her name. But Daniel understood something they did not. Being seen after humiliation did not erase the humiliation. It only made justice arrive late, carrying a debt it could never fully repay. After Victor left, no one rushed to fill the silence. The Orchid Room had become something different from a private dining space above Los Angeles. It had become a mirror, and every man in it could see what he had allowed himself to overlook. The cold food still sat on porcelain plates. The tea had gone lukewarm. Outside the windows, the city kept moving, but inside, time seemed to wait for Daniel Han to decide what kind of man would leave this room. He picked up the jade ring from the table and held it in his palm, not wearing it now, simply feeling its weight. Then he looked at Maya Bennett. She was still sitting on the edge of the cream leather chair, as if she expected someone to tell her she had taken up too much space. Her apron was stained with one small drop of tea. Her shoulders were straight, but exhaustion lived around her eyes. Daniel had seen men beg, bargain, flatter, and betray for less than what Maya had carried without asking for anything in return. 7 years. A letter. Promise. A dying woman's last trust. And she had carried all of it while working double shifts, washing uniforms in sinks, and being corrected by people who had never held a stranger's hand through the night. What do you want? Daniel asked. The question startled her. Maya looked at him as if she had misheard. I am sorry. For 7 years you protected my mother's words. You tried to bring them to me. You were turned away. Tonight you spoke when staying quiet would have been safer. His voice lowered. Tell me what you want. The room watched her. Some expected money. Some expected a job. Some expected the embarrassed modesty of a woman trained to refuse help even when she needed. Maya looked down at her hands. They were not delicate hands. They were working hands, hands that had carried trays, cleaned counters, folded hospice blankets, counted cash tips under poor kitchen light, and held Unji Han's fingers when those fingers had grown cold. There is a place, she said slowly. St. Bridget's. Daniel did not move. The hospice. It is still open but barely. The roof leaks in 2 patient rooms. The night staff is always short. Sometimes people spend their last hours listening to machines beep, because no one has time to sit with them. Her voice caught, but she steadied it. Your mother should not have been there without family. But if she had to be there, I am grateful she was not alone. Other people are alone every night. Daniel's face changed, not dramatically but deeply. He had asked what she wanted and she had not asked for herself. That made the room more ashamed than any accusation could have. Maya looked up at him. If you want to honor her, help that place. Not because it has your mother's name attached to it. Not for newspapers. Not for a plaque. Just make sure people without money still get treated like they belong to somebody. The older capo, Mr. Cho, lowered his eyes. Somewhere near the wall, a man who had not spoken all night cleared his throat quietly and looked away. Daniel set the jade ring beside the letter again. Done, he said. Maya blinked. Mr. Han, I did not mean tonight. I meant maybe you could speak to someone or visit, or look into it. Done, he repeated. The roof. The staffing. The equipment. The patients who have no one. All of it. Maya stared at him, searching his face for performance, for the kind of grand promise powerful people made when an audience was watching. She found none. Daniel turned to the men at the table. Tomorrow morning, legal will establish a private foundation in my mother's name. Quietly. No press. No faversikschand. Mr. Cho, you will oversee the first transfer with independent auditors. St. Bridget's will not beg for survival again. Mr. Cho nodded, his voice rough. Yes, Daniel. Daniel looked back at Maya. And you will advise them. Maya's eyes widened. Me. You know what they need. I am a waitress. You were the only person in this room who understood what my mother needed. The word struck harder than praise. Maya looked away, but not before Daniel saw the tears gather. She did not let them fall. She had spent too many years learning how not to give people the satisfaction of seeing what their world had done to her. Daniel understood that restraint now. He pushed back his chair and stood. Every man in the room stood with him, but Daniel raised one hand, stopping them. Then he did something none of them expected. He pulled out the chair directly across from his own seat, the chair reserved for equals, rivals, and honored guests, and turned it toward Maya. Sit here, he said. Maya looked at the chair, then at the men watching. I am already sitting. No, Daniel said softly. You are waiting to be dismissed. The truth of it made her breath catch. Slowly, Maya rose from the side chair. Her legs felt unsteady, but she walked to the place Daniel had offered. No one spoke. No one dared make the moment smaller. When she sat across from him, the entire shape of the room changed. The waitress was no longer near the wall, no longer on the edge, no longer easy to ignore. She sat at the center of the table, with Eunji Han's letter between them like a bridge built out of grief, truth, and a promise kept by someone the world had underestimated. Daniel bowed his head, not deeply, not theatrically, but enough for every man in the room to understand. Thank you, Maya Bennett, he said, for staying when my family did not. The room went silent again, but this silence was different. It was not fear. It was respect learning how to breathe. By midnight, the Orchid Room no longer looked like a place where powerful men came to decide the fate of other people. It looked like a room after a storm had passed through and left every polished surface shining with things no one could pretend not to see. Daniel Han remained standing at the head of the table, but something about him had changed. He still wore the tailored suit. He still carried the same quiet authority. The men still waited for his words before they moved. But the cold distance that had once surrounded him like bulletproof glass had cracked, and through it came the memory of a mother who had loved him before the world taught him to be feared. Maya sat across from him with Eunji's letter resting between them. She had not touched the food. She had not asked for water. She looked as if part of her still expected the night to correct itself, for someone to tell her this had all been a mistake, that women like her did not sit in chairs like that for long. Daniel saw it, and the realization settled heavily in his chest. It was not enough to invite a person to the table once. Dignity had to be protected after the room stopped watching. He turned to Mr. Cho. Make sure Miss Bennett's position here is secure until she decides otherwise. No pressure. No punishment. No whispers. Mr. Cho bowed his head. Of course. Daniel looked at Maya. You do not owe this restaurant another shift. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. I need to work. I know. His voice was gentle but not pitying. That is why any choice after tonight will be yours. Not Victor's. Not mine. The words moved through her slowly. Choice. It sounded simple to people who had always had it. To Maya it felt almost dangerous. For years, survival had made choices for her.
Rent chose.
Medical bills chose.
Anti-réfrigérateur chose.
Managers with narrow smiles chose. But now, in a room where she had once been expected to lower her eyes, someone had placed the decision back into her hands. Daniel picked up the jade ring. For a moment, everyone seemed to think he would put it back on. Instead, he set it gently on top of his mother's letter and pushed both toward Maya, stopping just before they crossed the middle of the table. I cannot give you this, he said. It belongs to my family. But I can tell you what my mother would have wanted you to know. Maya's eyes lifted. Daniel's voice dropped. Not for secrecy but for reverence. She would have said that the person who stays with the forgotten is never beneath the person who arrives too late. The sentence broke something small and hidden in Maya. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. This time she did not wipe it away quickly. This time, no one looked at her as though her emotion was an inconvenience. Mr. Cho lowered his head. One of the younger men near the wall turned toward the window, blinking hard. Even Peter Vale, still shaken at the far end of the room, stared at Maya with the dawning shame of a man who had almost forgotten she was the reason Mercy had entered the room that night. Daniel turned to him next. Mr. Vale. Peter straightened. Yes, sir. Go home to your family. Tomorrow you will meet with our accountants and correct what can be corrected. You will answer honestly. No performances. No excuses. But tonight you go home. Peter's face collapsed with relief, but Daniel raised one hand. Do not thank me. Thank her. Peter looked at Maya. The words took effort, not because he lacked gratitude, but because humility was a language men in rooms like this rarely practiced. Thank you, Miss Bennett. Maya nodded once. Go home. And somehow those two simple words carried Unji's mercy farther than any command Daniel had given all evening. One by one, the men left the orchid room, quieter than they had entered. Some avoided Maya's eyes out of shame. Others met them with careful respect. When the last door closed, only Daniel and Maya remained with the letter, the ring, the cooling tea, and the city lights trembling beyond the glass. Daniel looked out over Los Angeles, then back at the woman who had brought his mother's voice home in a waitress uniform. I spent 7 years building a world where no one could hurt me, he said. And somehow all I built was a place where no one could reach me. Maya did not rush to comfort him. She had learned that real comfort did not cover the wound too quickly. It simply stayed near it without turning away. Your mother reached you, she said. Daniel looked at the letter. Through you. Maya stood then slowly, no longer because she was dismissed, but because she was ready. She removed her apron, folded it once, and laid it on the chair where she had first been told to sit. Not in anger. Not in shame. Like a chapter closing. Daniel watched without interrupting. At the door Maya paused and turned back. The room was softer now, the lanterns dimmed. The table no longer a throne but just wood beneath the weight of human truth. She loved you, Maya said. Even at the end. Especially then. Daniel closed his hand around the jade ring, and for the first time in years, he let the words enter him without fighting them. Maya walked out of the orchid room with her head high. No one stopped her. No one called her temporary. No one looked through her. And behind her, Daniel Hahn stood in silence, finally understanding that power could make a room afraid, but only humility could make it holy. That night, the world did not remember the fear in Daniel Hahn's name. It remembered the dignity of Maya Bennett, the woman who carried a mother's final words across 7 years of silence, and placed them gently into the hands of a son who had forgotten how to grieve.